welcome to our channel, where we set out to explore great works of literature.
While dressed in elegant clothing, because why the hell not?
So today is going to be a very angry video.
An angry review.
A little bit. We've alluding to this video in the past one from Phantom of the Opera. We started hinting at
Henry James.
Yes, our aversion to Henry James. Although Ava has some nice things to say, and I think I'll have some nice things to say, but this seems to be generally going to be a critique of Henry James' style.
One book, right? Will be, for me, one book will criticize probably critique a little bit more. But I've had a good experience with one of them.
Okay, so let's start off with a sort of a biographical note on the author. Henry James was born in New York in 1843 of Irish and Scottish ancestry. He received a cosmopolitan education in New York, London, Paris, and Geneva, and he entered law school at Harvard in 1862. So one of his earliest novels, he had a number of novels, but his earlier works culminated in the Portrait of a Lady.
Probably his most famous work, too.
And it is his most famous and most beloved work, I should say. So pretty much people kind of divide James into three segments, three phases. So there's James the First, James the Second, and then there's like James the Third, the later James, I suppose. Yeah. And so Portrait of a Lady was kind of the culmination of his first phase. And then if many of you have read The Turn of the Screw, which is kind of like a gothic story that Henry James did in a lot of plays that he also wrote during this time, is kind of his second stage. And the later stage, the last part of his career, was The Ambassadors, and his last work is I believe The Golden Bowl, and this was published in 1904. So Ava and I, we ended up taking on this one together, and I mean taking on.
We're not going to start with this one, though.
It was a bit of a slog. No, but we're not. We won't. No. But this was the one we ended up reading together, and so I guess the structure of this, the approach we're going to take, you'll start off with the one you read.
His early work will go in chronological order.
So she had read that one herself.
Yeah.
And The Ambassadors, which was published in 1903, a year before The Golden Bowl, was one I had read on my own. And together at the end we'll converge on the one that we had read together, and we'll give our own opinions throughout.
Sounds good.
So did you want to begin?
Yeah, so I'll start with Portrait of a Lady. So I actually really love this book. Just to give a little bit of a background on it. Just so you know, like Virginia Woolf really liked and was inspired by Henry James. Edith Wharton was a friend of Henry James. And I can understand from a female perspective why that would have been for this era. So in the 1800s, I would say it was probably a more like feminist approach, actually, to this book. So the main character, Isabel, is this woman from New York, I think New York, or from the States, and she visits her aunt in England, and she's a very independent lady. So especially during that era, there's certain quotes in the book throughout that she talks about, like, well, I know I have to dress, I'm dressing up in a dress, not because I want to, but because society expects this of me. I know people want me to marry, but I'm not, like, she rejects many suitors for her pursuit of independence, so she doesn't have to be tied down to a man. And then she inherits quite a bit of wealth, and in doing so, she eventually ends up marrying, and I think she was a little bit tricked into this marriage, and it ends up that her partner is really colluding with a woman to basically steal her inheritance. But in that process, she ends up really loving and taking under her wing Pansy, who's her husband's daughter. So in the beginning, I really liked the introduction of Isabel. She's like a very strong female lead, very independent, has her own mind. She likes to engage in conversation with people and is not afraid to express her opinion, especially when it comes to what she should wear, how she should act in society, which I really loved that introduction. So the ending was rather ambiguous, and I had mixed feelings about that. So I felt on one level, up until that point, I was quite shocked by how progressive Henry James was towards her character. And the modern part of me was a little bit disappointed by the fact that she kind of went back to this very narcissistic, abusive relationship and financially abusive relationship. But then on the other hand, I guess it made sense for that era. And I also was wondering, maybe part of it was, since throughout most of the novel it's this pursuit of independence that the character has, I wondered if it was to show the difficulty in that once you've inherited so much money, and also once you fall in love with a child. So I think she had this very maternal instinct of caring for Pansy, and I wonder if that duty. Yeah, that sense of duty kind of changed her perspective of independence. But it's never really kind of spelt out to the reader, the ending or her thoughts at that point. Otherwise, the character development is phenomenal, and I love when you can kind of get into the psychology of a character, and I think Henry James did a spectacular job of that. Like, you really feel like you know the character Isabel really well.
Yeah, and like that's one of the things of Henry James, is that he always leaves you with ambiguous endings, and a lot of times also the heroine also dies in the end. So he never leaves you feeling jolly good and sort of warm and fuzzy inside at the end of his novels. So there's what he's trying to do is sort of I don't know if I mentioned the literary realism. So Henry James kind of straddles this chasm between this mode of literary realism and another mode which later he was kind of like the precursor for literary modernism. So that's why you have this stream of consciousness that he's almost like, it seems like he's writing in a stream of consciousness. Virginia Woolf kind of like took that up as well in her writing. But he kind of tried to express it in realistic terms as possible. So the dialogue tried to be as realistic as possible. So a lot of these people interrupt themselves. There's all these different conditions and provisos of all the things that they're saying, these sort of double negatives. It just becomes so caught up in itself. I think it's so, in many ways, it's very psychological. It's very, it's very, very insightful in many ways. But I think that whatever quality you can get from that insight is completely marred by the words on top of sentence structures and negations of sentence structures.
In his later work, right? Like in his earlier work, I didn't find that at all. I was actually shocked when I read The Golden Bowl with you, because they're almost completely different works. And I think that that's important, because if you started with Henry James's later works, you may decide it's not for you. Mm-hmm. And Portrait of a Lady, it is a masterpiece.
It's like a Victorian style novel, right?
Yeah, I mean, perfumes were named after it, right? For a reason, because it creates a character. There were movies also based off of it. Yeah. So I think there's a reason for that. It's a great piece of literature. Yeah. But anyway, we can move on to the next one.
So this one was one of his later novels. So the last stage of his sort of writing career, I suppose. And it's called The Ambassadors, and I'm going to admit shamefacedly, of course, that I was very much intrigued by this cover. It's very aesthetically pleasing to me, and I was hoping that the novel itself would be evocative of the imagery that
And we tried to slog through the first little bit, and he was dictating it to me, and I was like, this is not for me.
Well, one of the things that was very interesting is that as I was reading it, in a masochistic sort of bent, I suppose, I needed to finish this book. Even I had started it, I didn't quite enjoy the writing style, I found it confusing, but I decided to slog through it. Is that it's much it's much better read in your head, because you're allowed the rhythm. You can kind of like it flows better as you're trying to vocalize it, and you're reading it to someone. It's so easy to get bogged down in all the different sort of clauses and subclauses and interruptions of speech, and it doesn't make for a very good effect. But when we were reading it to one another, I did it did strike me that it's the lilt. I guess it's the tone, it's the rhythm, it's the cadence in which you're reading this that allows it to be actually heard as it should be heard, I suppose, or like read as it should be read. And as we started to read it, started to read it more in the way you were describing that your grandmother would speak.
I literally put on the intonation of my 101-year-old grandmother who passed away now. But the way she spoke was how I ended up, and that actually made it a lot easier to follow, which was kind of to our humor. It helped us get through the Golden Book.
Well, if you can imagine, like, I mean, obviously he was anglicized English, right? Like he was an American, but he was very much enamored, and he was with European culture. He was also brought up, studied in Oxford and all these different other places, and he was very much an Anglophile. You can imagine just the way he spoke himself, and his own diction, his own mannerisms, his own tone would have been the way he wrote as well. So in a sense, that's almost the way to read it.
Well, we said it did sound like a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
So he wrote. I don't know if it's just the. I don't think it. I think that's maybe letting him off the hook a little too easily, just to say that it's the way they spoke back then, because there's other American authors who do not
and many other
into so much verbiage,
and many other writers kind of like mocked him as well. So H.G. Wells has this funny quote where he said he kind of like caricatured him, Henry James, as a giant hippopotamus trying to pick up a tiny pea in the corner of his cage. And it's like just that imagery there, I think, kind of like sums it up in a way. You know, it's hulking, it's big, it's trying to describe something that's very minute and detailed and, you know, delicate, but it's doing in such a cumbrous manner that, you know, it looks like it's like a farce.
Okay, but before you destroy him, totally.
Yeah. Okay.
What was the book about?
So the Ambassadors kind of explores Henry James's fascination, and this is, I think, also paralleled in a lot of his other works, including The Portrait of a Lady, with this dichotomy between the New World and the Old World. And he liked to explore sort of the differences in culture and mannerisms and philosophy and way of life between sort of like Europe, and a lot of his characters travel to Italy. There's a lot of Italian characters. This one happened in France and in America, and he likes to play with it because he himself was an expatriate, right? So he was an American living abroad, but you know, he loves to play with that tension that comes about through the different civilizations, if you will, the Western and you know, the older Western, I suppose, right? The new and the old. And here is Struthers, who is engaged to a very wealthy widow. She is the heiress of a giant factory, giant plant, and she essentially she wants Struthers, who is sort of her suitor, to go to leave Boston or New York or wherever they are in the U.S. to go to Paris and to pick up her son, her young son, from the clutches of these evil French women, how she views it, because she believes that the sort of French Parisian society is corrupting her son, and she wants Struthers to come and convince him to come back and work for the family business to take over. Yeah, so but
boring.
Yeah, it's not particularly interesting, but through that sort of, because Struthers used to live in Europe himself, and he used to have these experiences in Paris and, you know, all these different European cities. Yeah, he kind of like recalls his own sort of youth and his own upbringing, and he starts to reflect upon, you know, these preconceived prejudicial notions of Europeans through Americans' eyes. You know, is he in fact being, you know, degraded, and is he in fact going the wrong way, or are they improving his lot? Is he being more, you know, influenced by culture and high society and good feelings and good ethics and all these different aspects? And so he kind of plays on that, and I guess James is coming to this realization through this novel, like a moral in a sense that, you know, think for yourself, essentially, like through your own experiences, through your own thoughts, come to a conclusion, or come to an you know, about a situation. Don't let preconceived judgments or prejudices
just
kind
in the
of
bad
color.
world, but it's lost in all the
it's
words,
very
right?
much it's very much lost in it. But I would not recommend it necessarily.
We'll get to that in the rating, right?
Yeah, but yeah. So let's.
I think also one key point that maybe I don't think we've touched on yet is that some people think that perhaps his style also changed quite dramatically because he went from writing, like actually physically writing himself to dictating
to a typist.
And that maybe that changed the length of the sentence structure. And like you can imagine if you've ever done research and you're listening to dialogue, it's more likely that those sentences will go on and are inaccurate and you know have their faults just the way we speak. So that might be part of it. Okay.
So let's move on to the Golden Bowl.
And look at how beautiful this cover is.
It's beautiful. It actually looks like Ava.
So maybe one of the moral. Well, no, that just makes me just look like I'm really vain.
I think it looks like Ava.
I think it looks. I just think her style, her picture is kind of cool. But maybe the moral of the story is don't choose a Henry James book based on the beauty of the cover.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, those clever publishers.
Oh yeah.
They got to sell those books. So, what did you think of the Golden Bowl generally? About the plot?
I think it was such a tease. It was like, you described it as being a slog. It was definitely that.
Yeah.
But it was a tease in the sense that I love a good character, and I was really optimistic after reading Portrait of a Lady that the characters would be dynamic and interesting and get to know them and their psychology better. And I found the characters rather boring.
Yeah.
They start to sound interesting and then they just switch perspectives of who's talking and they never really go. I don't know, I just never really found I really understood the character that well.
Well, let me give a good illustration here. So I'm going to read the back here. So this is how it's advertised. A rich American art collector and his daughter Maggie buy in for themselves and to their greater glory a beautiful young wife and a noble husband. They do not know that Charlotte and Prince Amerigo were formerly lovers, nor that on the eve of the prince's marriage they had discovered in a Bloomsbury antique shop a golden bowl with a secret flaw. When the golden bowl is broken, Maggie must leave the security of her childhood and try to reassemble the pieces of her shattered happiness. In this last of the greatest poetic masterpieces, James combined with dazzling virtuosity elements of social comedy, of mystery, terror, and myth.
Terror? Never experienced that. I never experienced any terror throughout it.
Yeah.
And like the Golden Bowl, I don't understand why it's named the Golden Bowl because
it was a crystal bowl.
Right, but like, okay, yeah, maybe it was a metaphor for the whole scenario, but I'm telling you the description of the Golden Bowl itself was more fascinating than the book.
Yeah, it was actually a quote from the Bible, so one of the passages in the Bible.
Okay.
So that's where the actual thing comes from, the actual reference to it. But here,
just so much went over my head.
So this sounded interesting. It sounds like, oh wow, the archetypal heroine journey, female journey, and she comes out and opens her eyes from being a naive young woman to being like sort of a world-wise.
Sounds like something
woman.
Like this.
Yeah,
right?
almost like something promising.
Or like Anna Karenina, where it's like, you know, just go through the motions and then discover that, hey, I don't have to fit this mold that society put me into. Right?
But all we get is this, and this is a prime example of, and this is actually
not all we get. It's like you just start to get a little bit of the experience of Portrait of a Lady in like 3 pages, and then it will go back to this again.
But this is a minor example of. This isn't even the most extreme example of his writing type. So here we go. Mr. Verver, it may further be mentioned, had taken at no moment sufficient alarm to have kept in detail the record of his reassurance, but he would nonetheless not have been unable, not really have been indisposed, to impart in confidence to the right person his notion of the history of the matter. The right person, it is equally distinct, had not for this illumination been wanting, but had been encountered in the form of Fanny Assingham, not for the first time indeed admitted to his counsels, and who would have doubtless at present, in any case, from plenitude of interest and with equal guarantees, repeated his secret.
I was getting PTSD listening to that.
I have no idea what the hell they just said.
Exhausting.
Yeah.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting. Yeah. It actually, honestly, I felt physical pain when I was reading this and Ava was reading this, and certain times you have to zone out, otherwise you're going to lose your mind.
I just got frustrated and I felt like it was very pretentious because it's like you're you're not even doing good storytelling.
Yeah.
You're just showing off your skill for
the sake.
having a high level of vocabulary, and just like fitting in as many words you could possibly string into a sentence. Like literally, that's what it was to me. It was just I got really frustrated with him.
You know what's
for being so arrogant.
What's an interesting point is, so his brother was the famous psychologist William James.
Oh.
So the Henry James and William James were related. And William James was a famous psychologist. And there was a quote from some random critic that said, William James is the writer, is the psychologist who writes like a writer or like a novelist, and Henry James is the novelist who writes like a psychologist.
Like a psychologist? He writes like a lawyer to me.
Yeah, but in the sense that like it feels like he's writing a textbook in a way.
Yeah.
Like there's no
like describing away things so that leaves you zero imagination. He explains away every single character's
He's so technical.
thoughts.
It's weirdly technical.
Yeah.
And
explains away every character's thought. He explains away every setting to minutest detail so that you're left with zero comprehension of even what's said, but then nothing's left up to your imagination.
It's that stream of consciousness writing, I think, that kind of gets to me, right?
I don't know, but I've also been able to hear other authors do it okay.
Like he would have one sentence and it would be a run-on for literally like a full page.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a slog. It was very challenging, and I don't think I'll pick up Henry James anytime soon, but we should rate these.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So
is there anything left you wanted to say about that? The only other comment I want to say is even with the dialogue, that was a little bit of saving grace, but it was boring itself too. It was like
yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Where
it was like Mrs. Assingham and her husband would be like, well, you give an example.
She'd be like, oh, I had a very unfortunate day today.
Unfortunate day?
Yeah, well, let me describe. Well, you know, Maggie and I had an interesting chat.
Chat?
Yes,
it was just
chat.
repeating
and
one word.
Just like, and it was like the laziest dialogue writing ever. There is an art to dialogue writing, and, you know, it is a difficult thing, I admit. I find it incredibly difficult to create dialogue. But my goodness,
that's trouble in this one.
That's a lazy way of doing it. It's just like, I feel like it was just an excuse to delve into motivations, but so artificially constructed that it just felt so false.
Anyway. Okay, so let's switch around here.
Okay, so what did you think of this one?
I would give it an 8 out of 10.
However, our scale is out of 5.
So I'll give it 4.0. I actually really liked it. It's a classic. Yeah. It's really
I have to read this
masterpiece.
One. I do have to read this
there's
one.
fragrances named after it. There's beautiful film made after it. It's a classic. It's good.
Yeah.
And I want to know, is there anything else that's like in this style that any other viewers would recommend to me, I guess?
Yeah.
Because I really, really did like this one.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hopeful that maybe some of his other earlier works will be similar to this style versus this one.
Yeah.
Okay, so 4.0 out of 5.
Okay, and I'm gonna give it 3. I'm gonna give it 3. 3 out of 5.
Wow, I'm surprised actually.
Yeah.
That you gave it 3.
Yeah. Yeah. Not much else to say.
Why 3? I guess, what did you like about it? You never really said anything you liked.
I guess it's like if you know, you can still, I do like to imagine the characters. I love, like, part of it is like I read things for the aesthetics, right? The aesthetic quality. And like he can evoke nice imagery, like a nice aesthetic. And, just imagining the suits and the dresses and sort of like the Parisian boulevards.
So you like some of his description?
Yeah, I don't mind description if it's well done and it evokes something from me besides frustration. Yeah.
Okay. What about the Golden Bowl?
I'll say 3.6.
What?
Yeah.
Higher than that one? You get 3.6 out of 5?
Yeah, because this one actually had more intrigue and more drama, surprisingly.
3.6
than
out of
this.
5? Really?
Yeah.
I give it like a 2 max.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
I'm shocked. I'm
Yeah,
shocked, people.
Yeah,
That 3.6 is like a good pass. That's like 70 something %.
yeah, I suppose so. It was in terms of terms of the writing and in terms of the reading of it, I would give it like a 1.5. But in terms of overall, with everything put in place,
I liked his pretentiousness.
yeah, well, I don't know, 3.6. Maybe that's being generous.
Yeah, I think so. I give it a 2 tops. It was
Rubbish.
Rupert can eat it.
Rubbish. Okay, well, anyway, thank you so much for joining us, and yeah, please
have a good night. Please let us know if there's any
thoughts.
earlier works, like I said, that are good.
Yeah.
And let us know if you actually enjoyed his later works, and please tell me why you like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good night, and thanks as always for joining us tonight.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.